The Sleepwalker. Posted by Case by Case. I was sitting in my dorm room, getting some late night studying in when I heard it. A quiet sobbing sound coming from out in the hallway. It was faint, but my door was cracked open, so I was sure I could hear someone out there crying. I shut my book and tiptoed out into the hall. There was no one in sight, but I thought I could hear the sobbing from around the corner. I peeked around the bend to see a girl collapsed on the ground in her pajamas, her eyes covered and her shoulders heaving. I immediately rushed to her side and put my arms around her. She was blonde and a little chubby, and as she looked up, I recognized her from class. I wished I'd caught her name. "You're Casey from Professor Walker's class, aren't you?" She sniffed, recognizing me as well. "Yeah, sorry, I don't know your name though." I grinned sheepishly. "I'm Katie," she whispered before dissolving into tears again. She looked more scared than sad, I noticed, but I didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't all that uncommon to see fellow classmates in hysterics. Not only could the stress of college classes easily tear someone apart, but on top of that you were in unfamiliar territory. Plus, almost everyone seemed to have relationship problems of some sort. It was only the first week of classes, so I assumed Katie was still homesick. I tried to comfort her, rubbing her shoulders. I rolled my eyes, but invited Katie back to my room for some tea and girl talk. Studying could wait. I filled 2 mugs with water, put them in the microwave, and plopped down on my bed. My roommate was staying at her boyfriend's, so Katie sat timidly on the edge of her empty bed. I waited for her to speak, and after a moment, decided to break the silence. "So, what's getting you down? Boy trouble, homework? Catch a sad movie at the student center?" I joked, trying to lighten the mood. Katie didn't laugh. I noticed again the fear in her eyes, more pronounced this time. Worried, I leaned forward. "Are you okay? Did someone hurt you?" She shook her head slowly, not meeting my eyes. She took a shaky breath and said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." My stomach was in knots. Please don't be anything supernatural, not again. I forced a smile and promised her she could tell me anything. I wouldn't judge her. Katie took a deep breath and began her story. "It started when I moved back into my dorm last week. The first night there, I just finished unpacking everything and I fell asleep late, around 2 in the morning. I'm usually a pretty sound sleeper. I don't even toss and turn, but this night was different. Suddenly, I find myself outside my room, standing in the hallway. I didn't remember how I got there. I must have been sleepwalking. I've never done that before, not once in my life. It was a little freaky, but I just went back to bed and tried to forget about it. The next night was worse. I went to bed earlier, maybe around 11 or midnight. This time, I woke up and I was standing in the stairwell, 1 floor below mine. Just like the night before, I tried to brush it off and go back to sleep. Then the next night, it happened again. This time, I was downstairs, almost out the front door. I was totally freaked, and the following night I shoved my dresser in front of the door to make sure I couldn't leave. But that didn't help. When I woke up, I was standing outside. It was so dark, I didn't even know where I was at first, and all I was wearing was my PJs. Some guys walked by and started yelling things at me, nasty things. I was so scared. I ran and finally made my way back to my dorm. And every night since then, I've woken up further and further away from my bed. She started to sob again, and I put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "But not tonight. You only ended up in the hallway," I said, trying to cheer her up. "Which room is yours? You can grab some stuff and stay here tonight if you'd like." But Katie shook her head, wide-eyed. "I don't live in this dorm. My room's in the Madison Residence." I froze. That building wasn't even on campus. It had to be a few miles away. How could she have sleepwalked all the way here? There was definitely something going on here. I wished Ryan, my boyfriend, were here. The minute I thought that, I changed my mind. He's way too into this paranormal stuff. Best to deal with this on my own. The microwave beeped and we both jumped. I got up to get our tea. Is there any significance to where you were each time you woke up? I asked. Katie shook her head. I thought for a second and tried again. Did you walk out in random directions, or were all of the places you woke up in a straight line? She thought about it for a moment. I think they might have been in a straight line. Yeah, now that I really think about it, I do keep heading in the same direction. And tonight you ended up here, on the 4th floor. Yeah, that's weird. I wonder... She trailed off. I finished her thought. I wonder where you're being led to. Katie looked scared. I could tell she very much did not want to find that out. I'll admit, I was a little scared too, but my curiosity was piqued. Stay here tonight. My roommate is otherwise occupied. You can sleep in her bed, I said. I was going to study anyway, so I'll stay up and make sure you don't sleepwalk. Katie nodded and looked relieved. After finishing her tea, she lay down and fell fast asleep. I went back to studying. The next hour was pretty uneventful. I was just finishing up a chapter when, in the dim light of my desk lamp, I saw Katie sit straight up in bed. Her eyes were open, staring straight ahead. My pulse quickened. She looked so unnatural. I reached forward to wake her, but then hesitated. She's already been led this far. I want to see where she's going. I hoped she'd forgive me. I mean, how else would we get to the bottom of this if I woke her up now? Katie stood up and walked out of the room in quick, jerky movements. I followed. Katie made her way to the end of the hallway and into the stairwell. When she reached the first step, she dropped to her hands and knees and began crawling up the stairs. My heart leapt to my throat. The way she was moving seemed so inhuman. I swallowed my fears and followed her. When she reached the 5th floor, she walked into the hallway. She was going faster now, and I had to jog to keep up. Katie reached the door at the end of the hall and paused. She turned her blank, staring face towards the doorway and slowly, oh so slowly, reached for the doorknob. I was suddenly terrified to find out what was in that room. I darted forward and shook Katie awake. She came to and looked around. Several emotions flickered across her face: confusion, fear, and finally, anger. At me. You let me sleepwalk, she yelled. How could you? You said you'd wake me up. I apologized as a couple girls poked their heads into the hallway to see what the commotion was. One of them was the RA, and she came forward, arms crossed, and asked us why we were disturbing everyone. Sorry, I said. My friend was sleepwalking. We'll be going now. I paused. Actually, could you tell us who lives in this room? This one? It's empty. The girl who was assigned to it last year was supposed to get it again, but she never showed up. Strange, I thought, as we headed back to my room. Katie was still cross with me, but I promised to stay up the rest of the night and watch her. I stayed awake thinking of what could be drawing her to that room. When Katie left in the morning, I took a quick nap before my afternoon class, filled with nightmares of the room upstairs. After class the next day, I took a walk with Ryan around campus and told him about the sleepwalking. To my surprise, he was skeptical. It is strange that she's never sleepwalked before and now she's doing it every night, but college brings out new traits in people all the time, he said. And how can she be sure it was leading her somewhere? She even admitted not knowing where she ended up one of the night. She could have gone in a completely different direction. You didn't see the way she was walking, though. It wasn't normal. I can't just ignore it. The girl's terrified. I'm not saying you should ignore it. I think you should do the opposite. Convince her to stay over again, let her sleepwalk, and follow her. You'll see, when she gets to the room, nothing will happen. He paused. Take your phone with you. If things get bad, call me. I met Katie outside her dorm. I thought she wouldn't want to stay over again, but when I saw her, she was near tears. I'm so scared to go to sleep tonight, she moaned. I'll do whatever you think I should. Just please help me. My roommate was staying over at her boyfriend's again, so Katie huddled in the bed, sheets pulled up to her chin. I was more than exhausted from the lack of sleep the night before, but I was determined to stay awake. I put my headphones in, grabbed a book, and sat on my bed, facing Katie. My head began to nod, and my eyelids grew heavy, but I fought to stay awake. I must have dozed off, despite my efforts, because next thing I knew, I awoke to Katie standing over me, her eyes open but glazed, just like last night. I felt my skin crawl. She was looking straight at me. Katie, I whispered in a small voice. She kept staring, right into my eyes, and then turned and walked out of the room. I started to climb out of bed to follow her, but as she exited the doorway, Katie slammed the door behind her. If you've read my previous posts, you'll know my biggest fear is being alone in a closed room, and for good reason. When Katie slammed the door, my breath caught and I fell to the floor. You're fine. My brain screamed, willing me to stand up. I fought back the panic with deep, gasping breaths and finally managed to get to my feet. But by the time I opened the door, Katie was nowhere to be seen. The 5th floor, I thought. I raced to the stairwell, just in time to hear screaming above me. Katie, I'm coming, I shouted, not caring if I woke up the entire building. I took the stairs 2 at a time and emerged into the hallway. I didn't see Katie, but other girls had come out of their dorms and were clustered around the door at the end of the hallway. The screaming was coming from inside the room. It's locked, one of them said, and another replied, the RA went to get keys. She'll be here any second. The RA came back out of her room as I was running past it. I hurriedly explained that it was my friend Katie, the same one who'd been sleepwalking last night. She quickly unlocked the door, and we both darted inside. Katie, I yelled. The room was empty. I flicked on the lights, chasing away the shadows, but Katie was nowhere in sight. I still heard the screaming, louder than before. It's coming from the closet. I pulled open the closet door, and a powerful stench hit me. It smelled like decaying flesh. The RA appeared beside me, holding her nose. Where is she? She shouted over the screaming. I was baffled. The closet was completely bare, but the screaming was even louder. That's when I noticed the barely visible seam in the wall, as if the back of the closet had a removable panel. I dug my fingernails into the crack, trying to pry it out. The RA saw me and joined in. My blood was rushing. I knew I needed to help Katie, but at the same time I was terrified at what I might find behind the panel. With one last pull, the panel came free. Out tumbled Katie, and her screams turned into sobs of relief. I leaned over to help pick her up off the ground when I glanced into the darkness of the crawl space behind the wall. I'll never forget what I saw there. 2 sunken eyes stared at me from a face of stretched, rotted flesh. A mouth opened up into a gaping, silent scream. For a second, I thought I did hear it scream, until I realized that was my own voice. When the RA saw what was in the closet, she hurried us out of the room and called the police. They said the corpse had been there for months, and it was the body of the girl whose dorm it had been. It turns out she was killed and hidden in the wall around the time everyone moved out last year. The school thought she'd left, and she had had such a troubled life at home that her family believed she'd finally cut ties with them and run off. I learned later that the police had been able to link DNA evidence to her abusive ex-boyfriend, who lived in town. He was arrested 2 days later. When we learned the victim's name, Katie looked up in shock and said, "I knew her." It turns out the girl, Anna, had had a lot of trouble making friends in her first year of college. Katie noticed and had gone out of her way to be nice. It was near the end of the school year, so they didn't get a chance to know each other well, but Anna seemed very grateful for Katie's company. I don't know if Katie will sleep any better now, but at least her nightly wanderings have come to an end. I called Ryan that night. I just couldn't sleep alone, and the RA let me break the no boys past 11 p.m. rule. "Just this once," she said. The next morning, I saw Katie when I arrived at chemistry. She told me something she'd just remembered. The last thing Katie ever said to Anna was this: "If you ever need anything at all, just let me know and I'll come right over." I guess Anna did need something after all.